Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with my usual quick reminder to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment. Also, I keep forgetting to mention this, but there's also the hype button now too, so that's yet another button you can tap to help me out in the algorithm. With all that said, let's get down to business and discuss some unsolved mysteries. In 1999, at the absolute peak of a professional athlete's career, one of the NBA's rising stars did the unthinkable. At just 30 years old, Bison DeLay, the highest paid player on the Detroit Pistons, abruptly retired. He walked away from the remaining 5 years and $36.45 million on his contract. To the sports world, it was an act of inexplicable madness. To DeLay, it was the only logical thing to do. DeLay was a 6'10", 260-pound center who had won a championship with Michael Jordan's 1997 Chicago Bulls. Yet he was also a sensitive intellectual who arrived at team practices on a skateboard. He was a bookworm who devoured texts on art and philosophy. He was a lover of Nietzsche, and an accomplished musician proficient in the saxophone, trumpet, and violin. He was an adventurer who ran with the Bulls in Pamplona, held a pilot's license, and loved to skydive. He was also a man of deep complexity, having recovered from depression and an attempt to end it all in 1992. Early retirement, according to Bison, would allow him to just focus on living. In the end, this led him to a 55-foot catamaran in the South Pacific, where his new life and the lives of 2 others would be stolen. DeLay's ultimate dream was freedom on the open water. After traveling the world, he learned to sail and purchased a large catamaran, which he docked for a time in New Zealand at Auckland's West Haven Marina. He named the vessel the Hakuna Matata, a famous Swahili phrase for no worries that was popularized by 2 singing animals in a Disney movie. It was a floating, 55-foot declaration of his new philosophy. He was embarking on the beginning of a new story, and he wasn't alone. He was joined by his 30-year-old girlfriend, Serena Carlin. Born in New York and raised in Berkeley, she was described as the quintessential flower child. She was creative, shy, and adventurous in her own right, having befriended Prince and managed his charities before trying her hand as a makeup artist and a New York real estate agent. After the September 11th attacks left her depressed and wanting to leave the city, DeLay invited her to join him. The third person on the voyage was Bertrand Saldo, 32. Saldo wasn't a guest, but a professional. A French skipper DeLay had hired to captain the large catamaran on its long journey. Together, the 3 of them had formed a small, idyllic community on the Hakuna Matata, living the life DeLay had purchased by leaving behind his basketball career. This idyllic scene wasn't built to last. A 4th person joined the boat, DeLay's older brother, Miles DeBoard, 35. DeBoard, born Kevin Williams, was a computer programmer from California and the dark variable in DeLay's new life. The brothers' relationship was notoriously volatile, described by friends and family as frequently at odds. The jealousy and conflict weren't a secret. A previous crew member on the Hakuna Matata had actually quit, unable to stand the constant fighting between the 2 brothers. His presence on the final trip was a source of immediate and palpable tension. He had turned up uninvited in New Zealand earlier in the year, starting arguments before leaving. When he returned to join the boat for the trip to Tahiti, Serena Carlin made her discomfort known. DeLay, the younger brother, was a famous, wealthy, and successful athlete. DeBoard wasn't any of these things. He had financial difficulties and a strong jealous streak, despite his brother giving him more than 6 figures in cash over the years, in gifts and quote-unquote loans. These loans were of course a fiction to preserve Miles DeBoard's ego, and he had no intention of ever repaying them. On July 6, 2002, the Hakuna Matata sailed from Tahiti. On board were the four individuals: Bison DeLay, Serena Carlin, Bertrand Saldo, and Miles DeBoard. The boat was scheduled to sail to Honolulu. The last known communications from anyone on the vessel were a series of satellite phone calls made on July 8th. After that, the boat, and the three people DeLay's family and friends knew to be on it, went silent. The silence was the first piece of evidence. DeLay and Carlin were in regular contact with their families and their banks. While Carlin had warned her friends she might be out of touch for up to a month due to the remote location, her friends and family became worried. The first concrete sign of what had happened came nearly 2 weeks after the last call. On July 18, 2002, Miles DeBoard was seen docking the 55-foot catamaran at a port in Taravao, Tahiti. Disturbingly, he was alone. The investigative trail DeBoard left was clumsy, arrogant, and damning. When French authorities and the FBI located the catamaran, they found its nameplate had been ripped off. DeBoard had attempted to re-register the vessel under a new name, the Aria Bella. Witnesses reported seeing DeBoard, alone on the renamed boat, throwing large sacks from the deck into a garbage can. Authorities later recovered clothing and diving suits from the bags. A forensic team, decked out head to toe in protective suits, boarded the vessel. Their search confirmed the family's worst fears. They discovered what they believed were bloodstains. Even more chilling, they found what appeared to be bullet holes that had been crudely patched and painted over. They also found residue from a large caliber weapon. DeBoard, meanwhile, had fled French Polynesia. On September 5th, 2002, he surfaced in Phoenix, Arizona, in the most brazen way imaginable. He was attempting to buy $150,000 in gold coins from a bullion dealer. To make the purchase, he was actively impersonating his missing brother. He presented DeLay's passport as his own identification and signed receipts using DeLay's birth name, Brian Williams. Police were alerted and detained DeBoard on suspicion of fraud. Inexplicably, after a few hours, they released him. They couldn't, at that moment, disprove DeBoard's claim that his brother had authorized the transaction, since his brother was only missing. It was the last time he would be seen by law enforcement. DeBoard collected the passport and vanished, fleeing to Mexico. With DeBoard on the run, his ex-girlfriend Erica Weiss went to the FBI. She recounted the story DeBoard had told her, providing the world with the first of two competing theories about what happened on the Hakuna Matata. The first theory is DeBoard's own elaborate self-defense confession. As Weiss told the Los Angeles Times, DeBoard claimed a fight broke out between him and DeLay. Serena Carlin tried to intervene and was accidentally knocked down, hitting her head on a part of the boat and dying instantly. This led to a cascade of violence. In his main version of the story, the captain, Bertrand Saldo, wanted to report Carlin's death, which Miles DeBoard claimed sent DeLay into a panic. DeBoard alleged that DeLay then slew Saldo to silence him. This led to a final life-or-death struggle between the brothers, which ended when DeBoard shot DeLay in self-defense. He then admitted to taking the three bodies and dumping them overboard into the Pacific. If his story was to be believed, it was a disturbing tragedy of errors and crimes, with DeBoard as the sole traumatized survivor. This theory, of course, leaves a lot to be desired, since it portrayed DeBoard as likely legally innocent. If he was responsible for Carlin's death, it was an accident when she tried to break them up. If he shot his brother, it was because he was going to eliminate him to cover up the slaying of the skipper. The second theory, the one held by the authorities, is one of a cold, premeditated triple slaying. Investigators believed the motive was simple: financial gain. The FBI's case was built on evidence that directly contradicted DeBoard's story. First, there was the gold buying scheme, which showed intent to steal DeLay's assets. However, this could potentially be dismissed as an unethical and illegal action taken after the fact. The next part couldn't. Second, and most damning, the FBI found Dabord had purchased approximately $200 of dumbbell weights from a Rebel sports store in Auckland, New Zealand, before the final voyage. The FBI suspected these weren't for exercise. They were purchased with the specific intent to weigh down the bodies. This single purchase suggested premeditation, shattering the self-defense narrative. Further evidence came from satellite phone records. On July 8th, likely right after the attacks, Dabord placed a call to a mystery woman in New Zealand he had befriended. The authorities were able to get the records of the call, but disturbingly, he didn't mention anything whatsoever about what had happened. The manhunt for Miles Dabord, the only person in the world who knew the truth, ended on September 14th, 2002. He was found unconscious in Tijuana, Mexico, and transported to a hospital in Chula Vista, California. He was admitted as a John Doe, unidentified and in a deep coma. The cause was a massive, intentional overdose of insulin, which, combined with his failure to take his asthma medication, had caused catastrophic and irreversible brain damage. Before his overdose, Dabord had placed a final crying phone call to his mother. He offered a last, cryptic version of events, telling her that he found out the truth about something, but that no one would believe him. He told her that he couldn't survive in prison, but that he was completely innocent. On September 27th, 2002, Miles Dabord died, less than 3 months after his brother had vanished. He was the only person who could have told investigators what truly happened on the Hakuna Matata, and he took that secret to his grave. With the death of the sole suspect and witness, the active investigation into the triple slaying effectively ended. The bodies of Bison DeLay, Serena Carlin, and Bertrand Saldo have never been recovered. The case remains a profound, chilling, and technically unresolvable mystery. We're left with only the conflicting stories of a dead man and the cold, hard evidence of a crime. Patched bullet holes, blood stains on a renamed boat, and a set of dumbbell weights purchased in Auckland. The rest of the truth, like the victims themselves, was lost at sea. In a final tragic testament to the case's impossible, tangled grief, a memorial service was eventually held for both brothers by the family. In May 2006, a horrific discovery in Baltimore's historic Belvedere Hotel sparked a mystery that endures to this day. When 32-year-old Ray Rivera's body was found in the hotel's abandoned conference room, police believed he had done it to himself. Yet the bizarre circumstances of his death left family, friends, and even some investigators unconvinced. In a scenario straight out of a crime thriller, Rivera darted out of his house and vanished, only to turn up dead under perplexing conditions a week later. It's a case that has confounded authorities and armchair detectives alike, sparking countless theories but no definitive answers. Almost 20 years later, the question remains: what really happened to Ray Rivera? Ray Rivera was by all accounts a vibrant and multi-talented man with everything to live for. At age 32, he was an aspiring filmmaker and writer living in Baltimore with his wife Allison. A former water polo coach and athlete, Rivera had moved from California to Maryland in 2004 to work for his longtime friend Porter Stansberry's investment publishing company. In Baltimore, he edited a financial newsletter and produced videos, although he had grown unhappy with the job's direction. Outside of work, he pursued his passions, helping coach a local water polo team and nurturing a dream of writing a Hollywood screenplay. He and Allison, married for only 6 months, were preparing to move back to Los Angeles so Ray could chase his film ambitions. On the evening of May 16th, 2006, the normal rhythm of Ray Rivera's life was abruptly upended. Allison was out of town on business, and a colleague named Claudia was staying over at their Baltimore home. Around 6 o'clock, Claudia heard Ray answer a phone call that seemed urgent. He reportedly bolted out of the house as if late for a meeting. He left the lights on and his work computer running, as though planning to return shortly. In his haste, Ray grabbed only his cell phone and keys before driving off into the evening. When Allison's attempts to reach him by phone went unanswered that night, she became concerned. By dawn the next day, Claudia alerted her that Ray still hadn't come home. Alarmed by this uncharacteristic absence, Allison drove back to Baltimore and filed a missing person report on May 17th. Friends and family joined in a frantic search, but for days there was no sign of Ray or his whereabouts. 1 week later, a crucial clue surfaced. On May 23rd, Ray's vehicle was found parked in a lot near his office and the Belvedere Hotel. The parking ticket showed it had been there since the evening he vanished. The next day, May 24th, several of Ray's co-workers searched an adjacent parking garage for any further hints. From an upper floor of the garage, they spotted Ray's flip-flops, cell phone, and glasses lying on a lower rooftop of the Belvedere, right next to a gaping hole in that roof. Fearing the worst, they called police. Officers entered the meeting room beneath the hole and discovered a heartbreaking sight. Ray Rivera's body on the floor. His body was badly decomposed, indicating it had been there for days. The evidence suggested that Ray fell from a significant height and crashed through the conference room ceiling. Investigators theorized he had plunged from the top of the 13-story hotel, yet the autopsy noted numerous severe injuries inconsistent with such a fall. No one at the hotel remembered seeing the 6'5" Rivera in the building that night, and the security camera system captured no footage due to a technical failure. The Baltimore Medical Examiner ruled the manner of death undetermined given the odd circumstances. Several aspects of the Belvedere scene defied easy explanation. Most striking was the condition of Ray's personal items on the lower roof. His cell phone and glasses were recovered virtually undamaged, something a police expert found highly unlikely after such a fall. This strange detail made the first detective on the scene suspect that the evidence had been arranged or staged. Another oddity was Ray's known fear of heights, making it unlikely he would have climbed onto a roof ledge on his own. These inconsistencies planted early seeds of doubt about the simple theory that he had become overwhelmed with his own life. Then there was the bizarre note Ray left behind. During a search of his home office, Allison found a letter taped to the back of Ray's computer monitor, sealed in plastic with a blank check. The note's contents were baffling. It was addressed to, quote, "brothers and sisters," and spoke of a well-played game. Then it listed a mix of people ranging from Hollywood figures, like Christopher Reeve and Stanley Kubrick, to Ray's own relatives and friends. It even mused about making everyone 5 years younger, an inscrutable detail that left investigators puzzled. Oddly, the note began and ended with phrases used in Masonic rituals, hinting at Ray's recent fascination with Freemasonry. In fact, on the very day he disappeared, he had contacted a local Masonic lodge about membership and had been reading books on the subject in the weeks prior. Police sent the note to the feds, who determined that it didn't express any intent to end himself. To this day, no one knows what secrets, if any, the letter was meant to convey. Compounding the mystery, Allison reported that in the weeks leading up to Ray's disappearance, he had been unusually anxious and fearful. The home alarm inexplicably went off twice on separate nights, and one day an encounter with an unknown man while Ray was jogging left him visibly shaken. It's unclear if these incidents were symptoms of psychological stress or if Ray believed someone was truly targeting him. Investigators found no indication that he had any history of mental illness or ill intent towards himself. On the contrary, he was making concrete plans for the future. He had even reserved office space to work on a new project the following weekend. His family emphasizes that he was in good spirits, not someone despairing or seeking escape. In the view of Ray's loved ones, he was slain by an unknown assailant, and the scene at the hotel was a cover-up rather than an accident. Allison Rivera has openly suspected that her husband's death might be connected to his work life. The phone call that drew Ray out of the house was traced to the switchboard of Stansberry's company, yet no co-worker ever admitted to making that call. Moreover, the investment firm he worked for had been sanctioned by the Securities and Exchange Commission for fraudulent practices in the past. This raised the possibility that Ray stumbled onto something nefarious in the course of his work. Porter Stansberry's behavior after the tragedy also raised eyebrows. For instance, he reportedly instructed his employees not to speak to police about the case. He even insinuated that Ray had been experiencing psychological problems, a claim that Allison and others vehemently deny. This defensive stance, while possibly an attempt to avoid bad publicity, led some to wonder if more remains hidden. Other observers have focused on the physical evidence and alternate explanations. Some forensic analysts noted that certain fractures in Ray's legs seemed more consistent with the impact of a car strike than with a free fall. This fueled speculation that Ray might have been attacked elsewhere, and then the scene at the Belvedere was staged to conceal the crime. The condition of his phone and glasses suggests they may have been placed carefully, rather than dropped from a high ledge. Officially, authorities have not classified Ray Rivera's death as a slaying. Today, nearly 20 years after Ray's mysterious death, his family and friends are still desperate for answers. It sounds like a Hollywood thriller. A successful screenwriter drives off into the night and vanishes without a trace. In 1997, Gary DeVore lived that story. He was an established screenwriter known for action-packed films like Running Scared and Raw Deal, and he had worked with some of the biggest names in the industry. But DeVore is remembered today less for his hit movies and more for the eerie mystery surrounding his death. When his remains were finally discovered a year after he disappeared, the scene was stranger than fiction. His truck was found submerged in a California aqueduct, his hands were missing, and the new screenplay he'd just finished writing had vanished. Gary DeVore was a Hollywood insider, even if his name wasn't famous to the public. Born in Los Angeles in 1941, he got his start writing for TV shows in the 1960s and later made a name scripting action films through the 1980s. When he wasn't working on his own projects, he was a sought-after script doctor who polished many Hollywood screenplays behind the scenes. By 1997, 55-year-old DeVore was a well-paid veteran of the movie business. He had recently remarried and was living with his wife, Wendy, in a beachfront California home. Despite his success, he was pushing himself on an ambitious new project, a script titled The Big Steal. Unlike the light-hearted thrillers he was known for, this story was set around the 1989 invasion of Panama, and according to DeVore, would reveal explosive government secrets. DeVore had reportedly done extensive research for the screenplay, hinting that he'd uncovered the real reasons behind the Panama operation. Finishing this script became his obsession in early 1997, and it seemed like nothing could stop him. On June 27, 1997, DeVore was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, wrapping up work on The Big Steal. Late that night, he began the long drive back to his home near Santa Barbara, California, opting to travel overnight through the Mojave Desert to avoid traffic. Around 1:15 a.m. on June 28th, he called Wendy from the road. He said he was past Barstow, a desert town on his route, and that he was making good time. He sounded upbeat and alert, giving Wendy no indication of any trouble. Curiously, he didn't pinpoint his exact location, and shortly after, the call dropped. That brief conversation would be the last contact anyone had with Gary DeVore. When Gary failed to arrive home the next day, Wendy alerted the authorities, and a massive search effort began. Police, volunteers, and federal agents scoured the highways and remote desert areas, looking for any sign of his SUV. The case made national news and even appeared on America's Most Wanted, but no trace of Gary or his vehicle was found in the days and weeks that followed. With no evidence and no eyewitnesses, theories about his fate ran rampant. Some suspected he was carjacked for his fancy new SUV, with his body being dumped out in the desert. Others speculated that he had simply been abandoned in the desert and perished from exposure to the elements. Others wondered if Gary had staged his own disappearance or developed amnesia and wandered off. One of the more conspiratorial suggestions was that the CIA had secretly intercepted him due to the sensitive screenplay he was carrying. After all, he had been openly talking about government secrets he had uncovered and which were going to be revealed in fictionalized form. As summer turned to fall, hope of finding him alive faded. For a full year, the mystery lingered. A Hollywood writer had vanished into the desert without a trace. In July 1998, the mystery took a dramatic turn. A determined amateur sleuth named Douglas Crawford independently investigated Gary's disappearance. He had zeroed in on a specific spot, a bridge where the Highway 14 freeway crosses the California Aqueduct in Palmdale. Crawford went to that remote area and noticed debris that looked like pieces of a vehicle on the aqueduct's embankment. Acting on his tip, authorities dispatched a dive team to search the aqueduct. Sure enough, submerged in the water below the bridge, they found a white Ford Explorer, Gary DeVore's missing truck, with a body inside. The remains were confirmed to be Gary. A wallet in the pocket of the jeans on the body held his driver's license, leaving little doubt. However, the scene was anything but a neat resolution. Crucial items were inexplicably missing from the vehicle. Investigators noted that DeVore's laptop, which held the only copy of The Big Steal, was gone, as was the revolver he had brought along for the trip. Even more disturbing, DeVore's hands weren't attached to his body. His arms in the driver's seat ended at the wrists, and no hands were found in the vehicle. For a man who made his living writing, the condition of the remains raised immediate questions about foul play, and perhaps doubly so. Equally puzzling was how Gary's vehicle ended up in that aqueduct in the first place. The stretch of highway above it has a dividing barrier, and for the truck to go off the bridge, DeVore would have had to do some unusual things. He would have had to turn around and drive several miles in the wrong direction on the freeway, with his headlights off, to reach that spot unnoticed. No skid marks or collision damage were reported on the bridge railing, suggesting the vehicle might have entered the water without a typical crash impact. At first, officials leaned toward explaining the death as a freak accident. The Los Angeles County coroner found no obvious signs of trauma and commented that it looked like a simple car accident. But Santa Barbara detectives admitted aspects of the case were highly unusual and said they couldn't rule out foul play. The physical evidence just didn't add up to an ordinary crash. The bizarre circumstances of Gary DeVore's death soon fueled intense speculation. To many, the idea that his death was an accidental drowning seemed implausible, given the missing hands, missing revolver, and missing script. Instead, people looked to the content of The Big Steal for answers. According to those who knew him, Gary had hinted that his new script contained revelations about the invasion of Panama that certain people didn't want made public. This has led to a prevalent theory that Gary DeVore was eliminated to keep those secrets buried. In this scenario, unknown agents intercepted Gary during his drive, disposed of his hands to send a message, and stole his materials to ensure the information never got out. It's a chilling idea, essentially the plot of a spy thriller, but some aspects give it traction. In the aftermath of Gary's disappearance, his wife Wendy recalled some unsettling details that later took on new meaning. She said that in the months before he vanished, Gary had been getting phone calls from contacts in the intelligence community. He'd once instructed her that if the CIA or other agencies called, she should take a message and tell them he was unavailable. After his death, Wendy also discovered that Gary had taken a clandestine trip to Panama under the guise of scouting film locations, a trip she knew nothing about at the time. Even a former government official from the Reagan era came forward to allege that DeVore had ties to the intelligence community. None of these claims have been proven, but they added more smoke to the conspiracy fire. Of course, not everyone subscribes to the conspiracy theory. Some argue the strange evidence could still result from a freak accident, but even skeptics struggle to explain the script's disappearance and the car's impossible route. The accident explanation requires a chain of increasingly unlikely improbabilities. Officially, the authorities have closed the case, listing it as a vehicular accident with no evidence of foul play. In the absence of definitive answers, Gary DeVore's demise has secured a place in Hollywood lore as one of Hollywood's strangest cold cases. Imagine a city under siege, its defenders outmatched and its fall seemingly inevitable, yet the attackers find themselves halted by a single brilliant mind. As Roman ships approach the walls of Syracuse in 213 BC, they're met not just by arrows or stones, but by colossal, almost otherworldly machines. One vessel is yanked upward by an immense mechanical arm, its prow lifted high above the waves before crashing back down and shattering against the rocks. Panic ripples through the fleet as seasoned soldiers confront a new, unknown terror. The force behind these defenses isn't an army, a monster, or a god, but a 75-year-old mathematician whose ingenuity could turn geometry into a weapon. His name was Archimedes, and the device that shook Rome's confidence would be remembered as the Claw of Archimedes. The siege of Syracuse was a pivotal high-stakes battle in the middle of the Second Punic War. Rome was in a fight for its very survival. Hannibal and his Carthaginian army were still on the Italian peninsula, having inflicted catastrophic defeats on the Romans. Syracuse, a powerful Greek city-state in Sicily and a longtime Roman ally, had made a fatal miscalculation. After their pro-Roman king died, they switched sides and allied with Carthage. For Rome, this was an existential threat. A hostile Syracuse could become a Carthaginian staging ground, threatening to cut off Rome from the sea and its own island territories. The man who stepped up to defend the city was, ironically, someone who found the entire business of practical siege engineering to be beneath him. Archimedes of Syracuse was one of the greatest mathematicians of all time, a polymath who lived for pure theory. He was fascinated by the area of a circle, the volume of a sphere, the laws of buoyancy, and the power of the lever. He famously boasted, "Give me a lever long enough, and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world." According to the historian Plutarch, Archimedes didn't want to build weapons, essentially seeing this as an affront to the beauty of mathematics. He had only built these machines during peacetime because his friend and patron, King Hero, had persuaded him to prepare the city's defenses. He was a theoretical genius forced by circumstance into the role of a weapons designer, something which the sources indicate sickened him. This is crucial for understanding the claw. It wasn't the complex, finicky device of a lifelong tinkerer. It was the direct, powerful, and terrifying application of a pure physical principle. It was, in essence, a giant lever built to move and destroy Roman ships for defensive purposes only. The claw of Archimedes, also known as the Iron Hand, is attested by the three main ancient historians who chronicled the siege, though their descriptions vary slightly. The earliest and most reliable account comes from Polybius, a Greek historian born only a dozen years after the siege. He describes an iron hand swung on a chain that would be lowered from a machine. An operator, likely protected inside the wall, would use a lever to fasten this grapple to a ship's prow. Once hooked, the operator would press down the lever, lifting the prow high into the air and causing the ship to stand upright on its stern. The operator would then secure the machine and suddenly slacken the chain, causing the ship to capsize or dip so violently that it filled with water during the plunge. The Roman historian Livy, writing later, adds a critical engineering detail. He describes a swing beam that projected over the wall. When the iron hand was attached to a ship, the other arm of the beam was sprung backward to the ground by the shifting of a heavy leaden weight. This counterweight system provided the enormous force needed to hoist the ship into the air before dropping it. Plutarch, a Greek biographer, gives the most dramatic account. He describes huge beams run out from the walls. Some of these were simple boulder droppers, which has led some skeptics to believe that's all the claw was. Skeptics have long pointed out that a Roman quinquereme was a 200-foot-long ship that could weigh over 100 tons, an impossible weight to simply lift. But Archimedes wasn't trying to lift the whole ship. He was a master of mathematics and knew exactly how to use it to exploit weaknesses. The claw was an ingenious application of the lever, combined with the counterweight system that Livy mentioned. Modern engineering analysis suggests this is the most plausible design. The counterweight, likely a massive lead or stone block, would be pre-lifted by men or oxen, storing potential energy. When a Roman ship was hooked, the operators would simply release this weight, which would fall and provide the immense, sudden snap needed to jerk the ship's bow upward. By the time the crew could react to what was happening, it was already too late for them. The claw of Archimedes was far more than a weapon. It was essentially an ancient psyop. Its physical damage was significant, sinking many ships, but its mental impact was total. The Romans were prepared to fight men, not battle a machine that had never been thought of before, and the psychological victory was absolute. Plutarch records that the Romans became so fearful that they were afraid of the walls themselves and what other wonder weapons could be laying in wait. This was the claw's true success. The terror it inspired broke the Roman will to assault the city, and they settled in for a siege. Archimedes' inventions had single-handedly defeated Rome's initial invasion strategy. This bought Syracuse some remaining freedom and cost the Romans time and resources they desperately needed elsewhere. For centuries, many dismissed the claw as a fantastical exaggeration, lumping it in with the more dubious solar ray. But in recent decades, experimental engineering and historians put the claw to the test. In 2005, a model was built based on ancient accounts that succeeded in tipping over a replica Roman ship. These modern tests don't prove the claw was used exactly as described, but they prove it could have been. The engineering principles were sound, the materials were available, and the mind of its creator was more than capable. The final bitter irony is that Archimedes' genius couldn't save him or his city. After a long blockade, the Romans, frustrated and angered by the costly siege, finally breached the walls in 212 BC. According to traditional accounts, as Roman forces broke into the city, The elderly mathematician was completely absorbed in a geometric diagram he'd drawn in the sand. A Roman soldier approached and ordered him to come meet the Roman general he had held off, who respected Archimedes and had explicitly instructed that he be taken alive. Focused on his work, Archimedes reportedly refused to leave until he'd finished the problem in front of him, telling the soldier not to disrupt the figure he was studying. The soldier, either believing he was being defied or acting impulsively amid the chaos, cut him down where he stood. And rumor has it this event started a 2 millennia-long feud between jocks and nerds that wasn't resolved until the last decade or so. 16-year-old Amber Cates from Columbia, Tennessee, planned to spend her spring break visiting relatives in Florida. On April 11, 2004, Amber was dropped off at her mother's house, expecting to leave for the trip that day. Instead, a friend arrived to pick her up, and Amber rode away with him, never to be seen again. By all accounts, Amber was a bright and spirited teenager, but Amber had also begun to test boundaries. She was hanging out with older, questionable friends and is believed to have occasionally indulged in illicit substances. When she vanished that spring day, what initially seemed like a potential runaway case soon turned into something far more troubling. Now, more than 20 years later, Amber's disappearance remains an unsolved mystery that haunts her community and family. In early April 2004, Amber was living with her older half-sister Brenda, who had just become Amber's legal guardian a few days earlier. Brenda was trying to provide stability for Amber after a difficult few years. Their father had died around 1999, and Amber had spent time in foster care and lived in multiple states before returning to Tennessee. That spring, Amber made plans to visit a relative in Panama City, Florida, for a short vacation during spring break. On April 11, 2004, which was Easter Sunday, Brenda dropped Amber off at their mother Trudy's home in Columbia so Amber could depart from there for her trip. However, Amber never actually left town with any relative. Instead, a 20-year-old man named James Gordon arrived that day to pick her up. Gordon was described as Amber's friend, and possibly her boyfriend at the time. Amber climbed into the car with him, telling family she would be back in 2 days, and the pair drove off. She didn't pack as if she were running away for good. It appeared to be just a quick spring break outing. That was the last time Amber's family ever saw her. When 2 days passed and Amber failed to return or call, her family grew worried. They soon discovered that Amber had never arrived in Florida at all. On April 13th or 14th, 2004, Amber's family filed a missing persons report with local authorities. At first, police considered the possibility that Amber had run away on her own, and based on Amber's history, they assumed she was a runaway. But Amber's family insisted she wouldn't just disappear without contacting anyone. Indeed, as days went by with no word from Amber, signs began to point to something more sinister than a teenage runaway case. Her cell phone showed no activity and her bank account showed no withdrawals, two facts which strongly indicated that she hadn't planned any sort of disappearance. The timeline of Amber's last known movements would soon raise even more red flags. According to what James Gordon told police, he and Amber spent some time together in Columbia on the day she disappeared. Gordon claimed that after he picked Amber up, he later dropped her off with another friend of his that evening. This other friend was 39-year-old Ronald Inzuriaga. It's unclear how well Amber herself knew Inzuriaga. He was a much older man with an extremely serious and violent criminal background. He had been convicted of SA in 1992 and spent several years in prison. What is known is that Amber somehow ended up in Inzuriaga's company after leaving with Gordon. Police immediately tried to locate this man, but ran into dead ends, and ultimately, it took 3 years to track him down. The story Ronald later gave would be the last known trace of Amber. He said that he and Amber went to lunch at a Waffle House on James Campbell Boulevard in Columbia. They then stopped so Amber could buy some hair dye, and finally he dropped her off at a garage that was a local hangout spot for teens. It was at that garage, Inzuriaga claimed, that Amber completely disappeared. Curiously, no witnesses have ever definitively confirmed seeing her at the garage, despite that location being the last place she was reported to be. Over the years, several theories have been proposed by law enforcement, by Amber's family, and by community members to explain what might have happened on that April day in 2004. The earliest credible theory was the idea that she was a runaway. However, given that she never contacted friends and family further at any point in the last 2 decades, and given that her social security number was never used, this is considered unlikely. Another theory that has been discussed is that Amber could have fallen victim to trafficking or some form of exploitation. This idea arose mainly because of Amber's age and the circumstances. She was a 16-year-old girl out with older men, one of whom had an extremely disturbing past. While this theory remains plausible, there's nothing beyond the initial circumstantial evidence to support it. Crucially, despite over 2 decades having passed, there have been no sightings of her whatsoever. By and large, the most credible theory in Amber Cates's disappearance is that she met with foul play at the hands of the individuals she was last seen with. The suspicious sequence of events on April 11th, 2004 raises many questions, and just allow me to very briefly sum up how shady this is. One adult man picks up a troubled 16-year-old girl, then hands her off to another even older adult man, who happens to be on a very bad registry, later that same day. The second man, the dude on the registry hanging around with the troubled 16-year-old girl, claims he simply dropped said girl off, and claims no knowledge beyond that. Oh yeah, and also no one saw her at the popular hangout where she was supposedly dropped off. Literally everything about that detour in Colombia seems suspect. It's also necessary to ask, why was a 16-year-old girl, quote-unquote, friends with a 39-year-old like this guy in the first place? Further, it's been questioned to what extent the two of them even knew each other, with the source that they were friends being James Gordon, another questionable individual. Ronald's background makes it hard not to consider him a prime suspect in whatever befell Amber. To be clear, neither man has ever been charged in connection with the case, and both have denied wrongdoing. In the early hours of July 5, 2000, a quiet factory in Seabrook, New Hampshire became the scene of a baffling mystery. A security guard's car was found ablaze in the parking lot, and the guard's booth stood abandoned, a pack of cigarettes and an untouched lunch still on the desk. The guard, 40-year-old Curtis Pichon, had vanished without a trace. Curtis was a former police officer and Army veteran who had devoted his life to public service until a devastating medical diagnosis changed his path. His disappearance that summer night remains unsolved, leaving behind haunting clues and agonizing questions. Curtis had always dreamed of a career in law enforcement and worked towards it his whole life. He achieved that dream in the 1980s, serving about 10 years as a Concord, New Hampshire police officer. Unfortunately, in his mid-30s, he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a progressive illness that ultimately forced him to retire from the force in 1994. Losing the job he loved was a crushing blow. Curtis became withdrawn, battled depression, and for a time drank heavily as he struggled to find a new purpose. By 1998, he was trying to turn his life around. He found work as a night security guard at the Venture Corporation auto parts factory in Seabrook. It wasn't his dream job, but a role where his police experience was useful and the physical demands were manageable despite his condition. By July 2000, Curtis had been at this security job for over a year, and he was known by his colleagues as a reliable, quiet worker who did everything by the book. He still grappled with pain from his MS, but he was determined to keep working and carve out a stable life. Curtis reported for the overnight shift on July 4th, 2000, expecting an uneventful night. Only a skeleton crew of employees was on duty due to the holiday. In the early morning hours of July 5th, chaos erupted. Curtis's green Mercury Topaz, parked just outside his guard shack, inexplicably caught fire sometime around 1:30. Flames engulfed the car, lighting up the darkness. Curtis quickly called the Seabrook Fire Department, and firefighters arrived to extinguish the blaze, but they could find no obvious cause for the fire. Oddly, colleagues later noted that Curtis didn't seem very upset about losing his car and the many personal belongings he kept inside it. Once the fire was out and the firefighters left, the factory fell quiet again, and everyone likely agreed they had all had enough adventure for one night. Around 3:30 that morning, a supervisor came by the security booth to check on Curtis and found the booth empty. Curtis was nowhere to be found, and in the guard shack, his personal items were left behind. His smog logs, lighter, and uneaten lunch were sitting as if he'd intended to return at any moment. Outside, the shell of his charred car still smoldered in the night, within plain view of his guard booth. At nearly the same time, a witness saw two vehicles speeding away from the factory's parking lot. An immediate search of the building and grounds found no trace of Curtis. It was as if he had stepped away from his post and vanished into thin air within minutes. The eerie circumstances, a mysterious fire, a missing guard, and cars fleeing into the night, marked the beginning of a perplexing case. When word spread of Curtis's disappearance, initial theories swirled. Given his personal struggles, some wondered if he had staged his own disappearance, or perhaps taken matters into his own hands. His family and the cops knew he had been depressed, so either of these options seemed conceivable at first. He had even recently acquired a weapon of some type, which raised concern that he might be planning something. However, no evidence had turned up, and crucially, a short time later, Curtis's family found that very weapon tucked away in his apartment, still wrapped and in its original packaging. This discovery indicated he had not acted on any dark plan that night. Another possibility was that Curtis wandered off into the night, disoriented or distraught after the car fire. But this theory quickly fell apart, since due to his multiple sclerosis, Curtis had great difficulty walking and couldn't have gotten far on foot. He also left behind items he would never have willingly abandoned. His glasses, wallet, and even his ever-present pack of smokes were still in the guard booth. As a heavy smoker, he wouldn't go anywhere without his cigarettes. Everyone who knew him was completely adamant about this. He wasn't just a heavy smoker. He was known for chain smoking on the job and at home, and while he was driving. There weren't too many places where he wouldn't light up, so this fact just didn't make a lick of sense to the cops. Investigators confirmed that after that night, there was no activity on any of Curtis's bank accounts or credit cards. It was as if his life simply stopped on July 5th, 2000. These facts made it clear that Curtis almost certainly didn't leave voluntarily either. Instead, attention turned to disturbing clues suggesting foul play. Evidence soon emerged that a crime might have occurred at the factory that night. Investigators discovered that someone had used a forklift to pry open vending and change machines in the plant's cafeteria, presumably to steal money. The timing was suspicious. The car fire may have been set as a diversion to draw the security guard away, while the break-in took place elsewhere in the building. If Curtis stumbled upon these intruders, it could have cost him his life. For Curtis's family, this theory was disturbingly plausible. Notably, Curtis had even told his brother he suspected illegal activities, like drug deals, were happening during his shifts, and he feared something bad might happen at work. The witness report of two cars speeding away reinforced the idea that multiple accomplices fled the scene after Curtis vanished, likely taking him along. With only a handful of people working at the plant that night, police scrutiny turned toward those on duty. One name soon stood out: Robert April, a co-worker who had been present when Curtis disappeared. In 2008, April allegedly told someone that he was responsible for the missing person from Seabrook, and then later even allegedly boasted that he had buried the body. This was, of course, an obvious reference to Curtis, if this hearsay is to be believed. And I really do need to stress that this is something some guy claims he overheard some other guy saying. Police later searched April's property, even digging up a suspicious concrete-filled pool, but found no trace of Curtis. April refused to cooperate with investigators, and although authorities have officially stated that they suspect he was involved, the lack of evidence has prevented any arrests. To this day, the case remains officially unsolved, with April being the lead suspect. The other individuals, if there were any others involved, as is suggested by the multiple vehicles, remain unknown. Notably, the cops haven't hinted at a motive as to why they believe April was involved in this crime. Curtis's family had him legally declared dead in 2008, but they have never stopped searching for answers. More than 25 years later, the disappearance of Curtis Pishon remains a haunting mystery. His family is absolutely certain he met with foul play, and they know he would never have willingly stayed away so long. In the mid-19th century, scientists faced a riddle that defied easy explanation. They had found fossils of lemurs, small, monkey-like primates, in India. Living lemurs, however, were solely concentrated on the island of Madagascar, thousands of miles away. The strangest part was that there was no trace of them, living or fossilized, in the vast intervening lands of mainland Africa or the Middle East. In a world that didn't yet understand plate tectonics, this biogeographical puzzle left scientists baffled. In 1864, a respected British zoologist named Philip Lutley Scalater offered a solution. In a paper titled "The Mammals of Madagascar," he proposed that a vast continent must have once existed in the Indian Ocean, connecting India and Madagascar. This massive land bridge would have allowed the lemurs to migrate freely. After it served its evolutionary purpose, he theorized, this landmass sank beneath the waves. He gave this hypothetical continent a fitting name: Lemuria. It was a simple, logical, and elegant scientific hypothesis. It was also completely wrong. But the idea Scalater unleashed was far too powerful to be undone by mere facts. His thought had just been born, and it was about to begin one of the strangest journeys in the history of ideas. And trust me, this hypothesis about lemurs would go to some very crazy and very non-lemur related places really quickly. It's important to understand that Scalater's idea wasn't fringe for its time. It was actually considered quite brilliant and progressive. In the Victorian era, proposing sunken continents and land bridges was a perfectly respectable scientific tool. Without an understanding of continental drift, geologists and biologists use these geographies to explain all sorts of anomalies in rock formations and species distribution across the globe. Scalater, a serious and prolific zoologist, was just engaging in standard scientific practice. But his idea was quickly adopted and radically transformed by another, more famous scientist. Ernst Haeckel, a prominent German biologist, was a fierce advocate for Darwin's new theory of evolution. Haeckel was obsessed with finding the missing link, the fossil evidence of a proto-human that would bridge the gap between apes and modern Homo sapiens. The embarrassing lack of such fossils was a major vulnerability for the theory. Haeckel seized upon Sclater's Lemuria as the perfect solution. In his 1876 book, The History of Creation, he proposed that Lemuria was not just a bridge for lemurs, but the very cradle of humanity. Also, I miss the days when scientists and historians could unironically name their works, The History of Creation, and just run with it. But I digress. His reasoning was simple. If humanity evolved on a continent that was now at the bottom of the Indian Ocean, it would perfectly explain why we couldn't find any fossils. In his maps, Haeckel confidently labeled this sunken landmass Eden and showed the various human races migrating from this single origin point to populate the rest of the globe. With Haeckel's influential backing, Lemuria made its first great pivot. It was no longer a niche zoological hypothesis, but a grand theory of human origins. Haeckel's scientific stamp of approval made Lemuria irresistible to a group that had no interest in lemurs, but a profound interest in lost cradles of humanity. This is where the myth truly took flight, thanks to one of the 19th century's most enigmatic and influential figures, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. Blavatsky was the co-founder of the Theosophical Society, a mystical religious movement that blended Eastern philosophy with Western esotericism. In her 1888 magnum opus, The Secret Doctrine, she unveiled a complex and sweeping history of the cosmos and humanity's evolution. But Blavatsky's Lemurians were nothing like Scalater's primates or Haeckel's missing links. They were giants, described as standing 12 to 15 feet tall. They were androgynous or hermaphroditic, laid eggs, and possessed a third eye in the back of their heads, which gave them psychic abilities. This was the myth's most important transformation. Blavatsky and the Theosophists had successfully severed Lemuria from any testable scientific claim. Its history was no longer accessible through geology or fossil hunting, but only through clairvoyant readings of the Akashic records. The hypothesis had become an article of faith, making it completely immune to any future scientific debunking. But back to Scalater's original puzzle. Science did eventually find the answer, and it was just as fantastic as Lemuria, but true. The theory of continental drift, or plate tectonics, which was proposed in 1912 and finally accepted in the 1960s, rendered the Lemuria hypothesis obsolete. Notably, when German geophysicist Alfred Wegener proposed this theory, his ideas were considered completely non-scientific. Interestingly, the new theory confirmed that Scalater's observation was correct. Madagascar and India had been connected. But they weren't a continent that sank. They were part of the ancient supercontinent Gondwanaland. They didn't sink. They drifted apart. The fatal flaw in Scalater's theory was the timeline. The breakup that separated India from Madagascar occurred roughly 80 to 90 million years ago. This was millions of years before the first lemurs or any other primates had even evolved. They couldn't have walked across a land bridge. The real solution to the riddle of the lemurs is believed to be oceanic dispersal. Scientists theorize that millions of years ago, a small group of ancestral lemurs was swept out to sea from mainland Africa, perhaps on a large mat of vegetation during a storm. By a 1 in a billion chance, they survived the 560-kilometer journey and landed on the isolated island of Madagascar, where, free from competition, they evolved. By the time science provided this definitive, evidence-based answer, it didn't matter. the myth of Lemuria had long since escaped the laboratory. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here once again with a quick reminder about the importance of the notification bell. So if you haven't clicked it yet, don't forget to do so. Also, if you've got the means to do so and you're feeling generous, feel free to help out my channel through a YouTube membership or the Patreon. On October 31st, 2002, Chris Jenkins went out to celebrate Halloween with friends at the Lone Tree Bar and Grill in Minneapolis. He was dressed in a costume and was accompanied by his girlfriend and another couple. Around midnight, Jenkins was reportedly ejected from the bar by bouncers. In the process, he became separated from his friends and left behind his coat, wallet, and cell phone inside the bar on a cold night. A bouncer saw him walk away from the bar, turning left onto Hennepin Avenue, but after that point, Chris vanished into the darkness. When he didn't return home, his family and friends grew alarmed, and a massive search effort began. For days and then weeks, volunteers and police searched for any sign of Chris. Sadly, nearly 4 months later, on February 27th, 2003, a body recovery team found Chris Jenkins's remains in the Mississippi River. His body had become snagged on debris near the 3rd Avenue Bridge not far from St. Anthony Falls in Minneapolis. Chris was still wearing his Halloween costume when his body was discovered. An autopsy determined the cause of death to be drowning, but investigators couldn't initially determine how it happened. With no obvious signs of severe trauma and a blood alcohol level above the legal limit in his system, police theorized that Chris's death was likely a tragic accident, or even his own work. They suggested he might have become intoxicated and fallen from a nearby bridge into the river, perhaps upset after an argument with his girlfriend earlier in the evening. By 2004, the Minneapolis Police Department had closed the case, concluding that no foul play was involved. To Chris's family, however, this conclusion was unacceptable. They felt that critical evidence had been overlooked and that the investigation was prematurely closed. The Jenkins family never believed Chris's death was an accident. Chris was a well-liked, responsible student with a promising future, and not someone who they believed was prone to reckless behavior or thoughts of going out voluntarily. Disturbed by what they saw as missteps in the investigation, his parents, Jan and Steve Jenkins, undertook their own efforts to find the truth. They hired private investigators and even independent experts to analyze the evidence. For example, one investigator found witnesses who reported seeing a group of men involved in an altercation outside a pizza shop across from the bar around the time Chris left. Their forensic experts noted that the condition of Chris's body was unusual for a drowning. He was found lying on his back with his arms crossed, his shirt still neatly tucked in, and even his slip-on shoes still on his feet. According to their forensic experts, typically, drowning victims are found face down with disheveled clothing and often missing shoes due to the struggle in water. To the Jenkins family, these details indicated that Chris may not have perished from an accidental fall into the river, but rather that his body had been placed in the water after death. In 2006, a new Minneapolis police chief took over leadership in the city and agreed to review the case at the family's urging. Around the same time, a breakthrough seemed to occur. Detectives received a tip from a jailhouse snitch who claimed to have knowledge of Chris's death. This informant told police that he and another man had encountered Chris on a pedestrian walkway of the Hennepin Avenue Bridge and targeted him for a robbery. According to this account, Chris was an easy target because he was intoxicated and alone. When they found he had no valuables on him, one of the perpetrators became enraged and flung Chris over the railing of the bridge into the river. Based on this new information, the police chief officially reopened the investigation. On November 17, 2006, Minneapolis police held a news conference to announce that Chris Jenkins's manner of death was being reclassified as a slaying. With the case now treated as foul play related, investigators followed the new leads. They interviewed the jailed informant and searched for the other suspect mentioned in the bridge scenario. However, this line of investigation ran into problems. For one, the physical logistics of the alleged crime were questionable. The Hennepin Avenue Bridge has fairly high railings, and a single person throwing a strong, healthy young man over it would be difficult, though clearly not impossible. However, it was speculated that perhaps the jailhouse snitch had been more involved than he had let on to investigators, and that perhaps both men threw him over. However, the authorities would discover there was yet another problem. The Hennepin Avenue Bridge has a clearance of approximately 40 feet above the Mississippi River. Chris's autopsy revealed no broken bones or major injuries that one might expect from being dropped from significant heights. Forensic experts had significant doubts that his body wouldn't have experienced major trauma in such a fall. However, again, this didn't necessarily completely rule out the scenario. Doubts also arose because security cameras facing that bridge didn't show any altercation on the bridge on the night in question. Given that Chris disappeared after 2001, and given that the bridge was classified as critical infrastructure, there were numerous security cameras filming all angles of the bridge. Some investigators began to suspect that if Chris had been slain, it might have happened elsewhere, and his body was dumped in the river later, rather than directly thrown off that bridge. By 2007, police had a suspect's name and presented it to prosecutors. The Hennepin County Attorney's Office concluded there wasn't enough evidence to charge this suspect, or anyone else, in relation to Chris's case. To this day, the case remains open and unsolved, with investigators still hoping to find the evidence needed to ultimately hold someone accountable. In the absence of a definitive conclusion, a number of other theories have been proposed over the years to explain what might have happened to Chris Jenkins. And before I discuss it further, there are still people who remain unconvinced that this whole thing wasn't just an unfortunate drowning accident that took a young man too soon. Chris's family has advanced the theory that he was the victim of a more elaborate act of foul play that didn't involve an immediate fall from a bridge. They point to various pieces of evidence suggesting Chris was attacked near the bar shortly after he was kicked out, potentially knocked unconscious, and then transported to another location. The private investigator the family hired learned of a possible gang initiation happening outside a pizza restaurant across the street from the bar around the same time. The family theorizes that Chris could have been abducted in a van, held against his will, and possibly harmed for some time before his body was disposed of in the river. This would explain why his body appeared as if it had been placed gently in the water. That said, it doesn't explain why his body showed no signs of significant trauma. Jan Jenkins, Chris's mother, has speculated substantially about what happened to her son over the years, going beyond the abduction theory. For instance, she speculated that an off-duty police officer at the bar might have had a personal motive to orchestrate Chris's removal from the premises, to get access to his girlfriend. While this theory doesn't propose the officer was involved in the actual slaying, the theory is the involvement of a cop may have made the authorities quick to rule it an accidental death in 2023. She's also hinted at the disturbing possibility of a ritualistic or cult-related sacrifice, though this aspect remains highly speculative, to put it mildly. This appears to be largely based upon the fact that he disappeared on Halloween, and appears to be tied to the theory that he was abducted prior to being slain. Looking at the evidence from a strictly objective basis, the scenarios proposed by the family are very much speculative. That said, his family has speculated day in and day out as to what happened to him since Halloween 2022, and I'm sure they've run through absolutely every scenario imaginable. Another theory that was and is popular online is that he may be a victim of the so-called smiley face perpetrator. Without going down that rabbit hole, this is a highly speculative theory about a predator or group targeting young college-aged men. The theory is considered highly speculative, and Chris is one of the cases often cited in support of the pattern of this alleged perpetrator. Unfortunately, I think it's going to be extremely difficult to actually resolve this case at this time. The authorities didn't treat this case as a slaying initially, and simply investigated it as an accidental drowning. In the nearly 4 years it took for them to reclassify the case, untold quantities of evidence went stale or expired. At present, we don't know who the suspect was or why the authorities refused to prosecute this individual, so it's unclear what evidence, if any, is needed to resolve this case. Picture two thrones, and on the first sits a king, the very image of divine justice. Before him stand two women, each claiming to be the mother of a single infant. With a wisdom that seems to cut through the fabric of human deceit, the king calls for a sword, threatening to divide the child. His gambit works, revealing the true mother's heart and cementing his reputation as the wisest ruler who ever lived. This is King Solomon of the Bible, a figure revered in all the Abrahamic faiths for his unparalleled holiness and wisdom. Now picture a second throne, this one shrouded in the occult and inscribed with arcane symbols. The king who sits here is no less powerful, but his authority extends beyond the mortal realm. He stands within a protective circle, holding a glowing ring that bears an otherworldly seal. With words of power, he commands the groveling princes of hell, binding legions of demons to his will and forcing them to erect a temple of impossible grandeur. This, too, is King Solomon, the archetypal sorcerer and grand master of Western occultism. How did the celebrated king, whose wisdom was a mark of divine favor, transform into the legendary Magus, who could traffic with demons and command spirits? The legend of Solomon the magician didn't spring from nothing. The canonical biblical texts, while containing no explicit magic, planted the seeds from which a supernatural reputation could grow. These accounts provided the raw material, a narrative framework of divine gifts, immense knowledge, and moral ambiguity that later traditions would reinterpret. The story begins with a divine encounter. In a dream, God offers the newly crowned Solomon anything he desires. Instead of asking for the usual things like wealth, long life, or the defeat of his enemies, the young king asks for a mind to understand and govern his people. This selfless request pleases God so immensely that he not only grants Solomon wisdom unparalleled by any king before or after, but also bestowed him the riches he didn't request. This establishes a critical precedent. Solomon's extraordinary abilities are supernatural in origin, a direct endowment from the divine. The Bible then specifies the nature of this wisdom. It wasn't merely judicial or political, but rather in breadth of knowledge of everything from the natural world. He is known to have had immense knowledge of flora and fauna, the latter of which would later develop into the legend that he could directly converse with animals. Solomon's greatest worldly achievement, the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem, also provided fertile ground for folklore. The biblical account details a project of immense scale, requiring vast resources of timber, gold, and stone, and taking 7 years to complete. The sheer magnificence and logistical complexity of the temple fed into a persistent belief that such a feat couldn't have been accomplished by mortal labor alone. Combined with the understanding of this divine wisdom, this created a narrative opening for the idea of supernatural assistance. Finally, the Bible is unflinching in its account of Solomon's decline. In his later years, his 700 wives and 300 concubines, many from foreign lands, introduced their gods to the land. He allowed them to build shrines for the worship of their deities, drawing the wrath of God directly upon him. This act is perhaps the most crucial element in his transformation. In the eyes of the believer, it creates a moral ambiguity, a problem with an otherwise righteous king. This spiritual failing provides the perfect narrative justification for his later association with forbidden knowledge and the summoning of non-divine entities. It suggests a man who, despite his divine gifts, strayed into darker, esoteric realms. Notably, the biblical account, while rich in describing Solomon's wisdom and accomplishments, is conspicuously silent on the precise mechanics of his power, which will be important. If the Bible planted the seeds of Solomon's magical reputation, a curious text from late antiquity made them bloom. The Testament of Solomon is the foundational document that transforms the wise king into an arch-magician and provides the detailed backstory for his command over demons. This work, which isn't accepted as scripture in any Abrahamic faith, filled the narrative vacuum left by the biblical accounts with a vivid and systematic demonology. Written in Greek sometime around the 2nd century AD, the Testament is a pseudepigraphical work, meaning it was falsely attributed to Solomon himself to lend it authority. It's a fascinating blend of Jewish, Christian, and Greco-Roman magical traditions, reflecting the syncretic spiritual world in which it was born. The story of how Solomon bound the demons and made them his servants opens during the construction of the temple. A favored young servant is being tormented by a demon named Orneus, who steals half his pay and food and drains his life force by sucking his right thumb. And yeah, trust me, that'll be the least unusual thing about this entire story, so strap in. Distressed by his servant's decline, Solomon prays fervently in the temple for the power to subdue the demon. In answer to his prayer, the archangel Michael appears and gives him a small ring with a seal engraved upon it, the pentalpha, later known as the Seal of Solomon. This ring, Michael explains, is a gift from God that will allow him to seal all the demons that roam the earth. Solomon uses the ring to summon, interrogate, and bind a vast host of demons, basically playing an ancient history version of Shin Megami Tensei. The text functions as a veritable demonological manual, and he compels each spirit to reveal its name, its malevolent function, and its associated astrological body. Most importantly, he forces the demons to reveal the name of the angel or the divine phrase that can thwart its power. This process effectively categorized the demonic world, transforming demons from abstract forces of evil into a classified list of specific agents of affliction. Crucially, Solomon doesn't merely banish these demons, he claps them in spiritual cuffs and then puts them to work, against their will. According to this tale, he then used them in building the very temple whose construction had puzzled later generations. Each demon was assigned a specific task, which Solomon believed the creature to be uniquely suited for, based upon its malevolent purpose. The demon Orneus, for instance, is forced to cut stones, while the powerful Asmodeus is made to tread clay for the bricks. Other demons are tasked with everything from being job site gophers to overseeing parts of the project in their own right. And yeah, if you think your boss is bad, just try to work for a demon who isn't doing the job willingly. This masterstroke of storytelling directly connects Solomon's magical power to his greatest biblical achievement, providing a supernatural explanation for its legendary grandeur. The Testament concludes by echoing the biblical account of Solomon's fall, but with a magical twist. Seduced by a foreign woman, he agrees to sacrifice to her gods. Solomon, ultimately being a faithful person, thought there would be no harm in a minor nominal sacrifice. However, with this act, all the gifts that God had given him departed, and he was left powerless to both humans and demons. The Testament of Solomon provided the narrative, but it was during the Middle Ages that this story was transformed into a system of practice. A new genre of texts emerged, the grimoire, or magical handbook. Falsely attributed to King Solomon to grant them an aura of ancient and holy authority, these books were not stories, but practical manuals for aspiring magicians. They promised to teach the very arts that the legendary king had mastered before he squandered it all. There was also another more pressing reason why these grimoires were tied to Solomon. If they weren't tied to someone of undoubted holiness, they could much more easily be construed as books composed of ancient and evil magic, in essence, regular illegal witchcraft. The most famous of these are the Key of Solomon and its later, more notorious offshoot, the Lesser Key of Solomon. Likely written in the 14th century in Italy and compiled from earlier medieval occult traditions, these works moved beyond folklore into codified ritual. They provided step-by-step instructions for everything the ceremonial magician needed. This included rites of personal purification, fasting, and prayer, as well as blueprints for crafting magical tools like wands, swords, and robes. There were, of course, lists of incantations and conjurations to summon and compel spirits to do the operator's will. The goals of these spells were generally focused on gaining power, gaining knowledge or wisdom, finding treasure, or falling in love. The first book of the Lesser Key, known as the Ars Goetia, became the definitive text on Solomonic demonology. It presents a highly organized and bureaucratic vision of the infernal realms. The text catalogues 72 specific demons, whom Solomon supposedly sealed with his magical ring. Each demon is assigned a rank within a complex feudal-style hierarchy reflective of medieval Europe. There are kings like Baal and Paimon, great princes of hell like Stolas, dukes like Barbados, amongst many others. And I know more than a few Genshin Impact players probably just had to pause the video right there for a second, because yeah, you heard that name correctly. For each of these 72 spirits, the Ars Goetia provides a unique sigil, or seal, a cryptic symbol that acts as the demon's spiritual signature and the key to its summoning. It also describes the demon's appearance and its specific powers, or the knowledge it can impart. For example, King Baal, the first spirit listed, can teach the art of invisibility, while President Marbas can cause and cure diseases and improve knowledge of machines. Notably, according to the book, the magician doesn't worship the demons. They beat them into submission spiritually, using divine and angelic powers, just like Solomon. The journey of King Solomon from a wise ruler to a master of demons is a testament to the power of storytelling and the enduring human desire to understand and control the unseen world. This Solomonic tradition became foundational to the development of Western ceremonial magic. By attributing their forbidden arts to a revered biblical king, magicians could frame their practice not as a wicked invention, but as a lost, sacred science. This act lent a crucial veneer of legitimacy to esoteric systems, allowing them to exist in a complex, symbiotic relationship with the mainstream religions from which they drew their power. Crucially, this air of legitimacy allowed the practice to be tolerated to a greater or lesser degree, even when other forms of magic ran the risk of the practitioner ending up on the stake. Stanley Grizek was, by all accounts, a fixture in his community of Rome, New York. For nearly 20 years, he and his older brother Peter had successfully managed local enterprises, including a gas station and a neighborhood bar. But not all was right with that local bar, and it turned out that it was holding a festering dark secret that concerned powerful and influential people. Stanley and his wife Esther resided in a house situated immediately adjacent to the gas station, maintaining a close connection to their business interests. The evening of November 6th, 1976, seemed routine until Esther began her usual task of checking the security of their home. Without warning, she heard a deafening sound as the back door flew open, violently forced inward. Stanley, upon hearing the commotion, rushed down the stairs to confront the intruders. Two masked men had breached the home. One of the men, described as stockier and shorter than the other, immediately attacked Esther, choking her and knocking out her hearing aid. In a desperate attempt to survive, Esther pretended to be dead, holding her breath while she lay on the floor. She noticed the attacker carelessly placing a pearl-handled gun right next to her face, a key detail that would later challenge the official police narrative. The perpetrators weren't operating with the haste of typical robbers. They spent approximately an hour within the Grizek residence, meticulously tearing the house apart. Stanley's daughter later relayed that the men had completely ransacked the property, emptying desks, throwing objects everywhere, and even ripping up pillows in their thorough search. This prolonged destructive process, investigators determined, seemed less like a usual robbery for cash or jewelry and more like a desperate, targeted search. They speculated that the men may have been looking for something small and concealable, perhaps a specific document or another piece of evidence. This suggested the criminals weren't merely opportunists. They were hired hands on a mission to retrieve something of immense importance. Adding to the bizarre nature of the crime, despite the extensive ransacking, the only items that appeared to be missing were 2 bottles of beer taken from the refrigerator. This detail strongly indicated that the motive behind the break-in was information retrieval rather than conventional theft. The theft of the 2 bottles of beer may have been a coded message, perhaps by the perpetrators to the mastermind behind the crime. However, as you'll see, the coded message may have been directed somewhere even more sinister, to the initial investigators themselves. After the masked men finally departed, Esther managed to struggle free from the ropes binding her hands and feet. Though her hands remained tied behind her back, she made her way into the dining room where she made the horrific discovery. Stanley was lying dead on the floor. The immediate response by law enforcement was problematic, setting the stage for decades of frustration for the Grizek family. Initial police work at the scene was so fundamentally flawed that it pointed toward either gross negligence or something far more sinister. There may have been corruption at a high level, ensuring an institutional effort to misdirect the investigation. The official autopsy report was perhaps the most stunning failure of the initial inquiry. It stated definitively that Stanley Grizek had been killed by a single stab wound that penetrated his heart. The family, knowing the masked men were armed and recalling Esther's encounter with the pearl-handled gun, found this account difficult to accept. Stanley's son, Martin, took the extraordinary step of conducting his own search of the ransacked house the day after the slaying. It was Martin, not the professional police investigators, who discovered a critical piece of evidence: a small shell casing on the rug. What happened next was quite sinister and supports the idea that something more was going on in this case. Martin reported finding the casing and called the Rome Police Department. A detective arrived and, rather than documenting the discovery properly, simply pocketed the evidence. Crucially, the detective then instructed Martin not to tell anyone that the shell casing existed. This request for immediate concealment, following the initial failure to find the casing, fueled the family's deepening suspicion that they weren't dealing with a simple, unsolved robbery. Disturbingly, it would later come out that the investigator never logged the casing into evidence, meaning that it had effectively disappeared. Further yet, even if he had added it into evidence, the chain of custody situation caused by the police inaction would have made tying the casing to any criminal extremely difficult regardless. Over a decade after the attack, Stanley Grizek's body was finally exhumed, and the results were shocking. This secondary forensic examination exposed the full scope of the initial error. There had been no stab wound at all. The exhumation confirmed Martin's suspicions, revealing Stanley had been killed by a bullet fired through his chest. The catastrophic failure of the 1976 medical examination, mistaking a gunshot for a stabbing, allowed the case to be characterized inaccurately for years. The forensic breakthrough provided evidence that Stanley had been the victim of a calculated hit and not a bungled burglary. This finally allowed new investigators to pursue theories focused on conspiracy and organized crime. Over 10 years after the attack, the case gained new momentum, centering on the idea that the two masked men were hired specifically to break into the house. This theory was substantially bolstered in March 1989, when an admitted drug dealer contacted police. He claimed that an individual had approached him, offering to wipe away a debt if he would commit a burglary. The dealer recounted being driven to an alley and told plainly to, quote, break into Stan's house. Investigators began connecting the targeted hit to Stanley's history with his brother Peter and the local businesses they shared. Peter Grizek, who had died 4 months before Stanley's slaying, had held the liquor license for the local bar operated by the brothers. This bar was linked to suspicions of illegal activities, including gambling activities, suggesting the killing stemmed from high-stakes illicit operations. The pivotal point in the case, however, rests on a profound shift in the relationship between the two brothers shortly before their respective deaths. Stanley and Peter had been very close, running businesses together for decades. 8 months before Stanley was killed, he visited Peter, who was gravely ill. Following that final visit, the relationship abruptly ended, and the brothers never spoke again. The compelling implication is that during this final encounter, Peter, facing his own mortality, shared a damaging, secret confession with Stanley. This secret, likely involving the illegal dealings tied to the bar and potentially naming powerful complicit figures, would explain everything. It's reasonable to conclude that Stanley was killed because he possessed this volatile, incriminating information. The timing supports this. Peter dies, Stanley holds the secret, and 4 months later, men are ordered to break into Stanley's house specifically to destroy all evidence. When the search for whatever evidence or documents were being sought failed, Stanley, the sole potential bearer of the truth, was eliminated. The subsequent manipulation of the autopsy report suggests the person who orchestrated the killing possessed sufficient influence to corrupt elements within the initial official investigation. This ensured the narrative remained pinned to a less traceable stabbing rather than a shell casing with forensic evidence in the form of ballistics. This is further bolstered by the fact that the investigating officer pocketed the shell casing and it subsequently disappeared. The slaying of Stanley Grizek remains an unsolved case, defined by the systematic breakdown of justice that occurred immediately after the crime. The identities of the two masked intruders, the person who hired them, and the full details of the illegal activities linked to the bar remain elusive. Ultimately, the slaying of Stanley Grizek isn't just about a man killed in his own home. It's a classic tale about a man who knew too much. The key to solving this 40-year-old mystery isn't necessarily finding the two men who pulled the trigger, but identifying the powerful figure who felt threatened. It was a night where the rules got bent a little, all in the name of fun. It was 1982, deep in western New York. The air was crisp, the mood was electric, and costumes disguised identities, creating an atmosphere of youthful chaos that masked the darkness waiting in the early hours. 18-year-old James Adamski, a senior at DeepU High School, was out enjoying that freedom. By all accounts, he was a genuinely friendly, super well-liked teenager, the kind of person whose life was just starting to open up, a typical bright young adult on the cusp of his future. He spent the early hours of Halloween morning at the 5 and 23 Tavern, a bar located on Transit Road near Walden Avenue, soaking up the atmosphere of a packed, raucous costume party. As the party wound down in the pre-dawn hours of October 31st, James decided it was time to walk home toward his residence in Cheektowaga. This walk home became the defining, tragic segment of his life. He wasn't entirely alone initially. He walked down Transit Road for a time with a girl. Then, they reached a point where their paths diverged, and they split ways. She turned in one direction, and James continued walking south down Transit Road, toward home. That brief moment of isolation, that unprotected stretch of pavement, was the last time anyone ever saw James Adamski alive. The vulnerability he experienced when he separated from his friend on that dark road marks the precise window of opportunity for the person who targeted him. When James Adamski failed to arrive at his View Court home, the initial concern quickly escalated to full-blown panic. A young man known for being reliable had vanished without a trace, leaving his family in an agonizing void of uncertainty. Police and several local fire departments launched an exhaustive search of the surrounding areas, combing the ground for clues during the days and weeks that followed. For James's parents, the hope that he was merely missing, perhaps disoriented or injured, was faded across 2 months of relentless, fruitless searching. The grim uncertainty lasted through Thanksgiving and into the very heart of the holiday season. Then, on December 26, 1982, the day after Christmas, the wait for closure ended in the most horrific way. Hunters, traversing an isolated area on Ransom Road in Lancaster, stumbled upon James Adamski's remains just miles from where he was last seen. The location of James's body was immediately significant to investigators. Ransom Road was several miles from Transit Road, where he'd been last seen walking. This distance immediately eliminated the possibility of an immediate, spontaneous attack by someone on foot and confirmed the necessity of vehicular transport. The perpetrator had to have used a vehicle, a car or a truck, to transport James and his body to the isolated location. The scene on Ransom Road in Lancaster revealed a calculated, though clumsy, effort to hide the crime. The location itself was secluded, situated off the main road in a wooded area near railroad tracks, confirming the killer's intent to seek secrecy and avoid immediate discovery. Erie County District Attorney John Flynn later detailed the heartbreaking state of the discovery. James's body had been placed in a shallow grave. This wasn't a professional burial by any means. The grave was hastily constructed and then covered with a scattering of twigs and leaves in an effort to camouflage the site. This rudimentary concealment was, nevertheless, effective enough to keep the body hidden for almost 60 days through the late fall and early winter. The amateur nature of the disposal strongly suggests the perpetrator was likely a panicked individual or someone who had limited time to act following the crime. The medical examination confirmed the brutality of the attack. James had been severely beaten, and the official cause of death was confirmed as blunt force trauma to the head. The physical evidence indicated a violent close-range assault. Blunt force trauma often suggests an attack motivated by intense emotion, potentially rage or personal conflict, rather than a quick, efficient killing meant purely for robbery or removal. This characteristic of the killing leans toward the possibility of a confrontation that originated in the emotionally charged atmosphere of the bar. The discovery of the body far from the bar, combined with the evidence of a rage-fueled attack, presented two potential scenarios, which I'll come to in a moment. Following the devastating discovery, the Lancaster Police Department launched an intense, wide-ranging investigation. Investigators interviewed hundreds of people, trying to piece together James Adamski's final hours and identify anyone who might have been involved. Despite the massive commitment of resources and manpower, every single lead eventually went cold, resulting in no arrests. Two primary theories quickly emerged, shaping the direction of the investigation. The first centered on an incident at the 5 and 23 Tavern. The venue had hosted a raucous Halloween party. Investigators considered it plausible that James had been involved in some kind of argument or fight that escalated and spilled out into the street. If this were the case, the perpetrator would likely be someone known to the bar crowd, potentially an acquaintance or rival who followed James when he left. However, the environment of the night significantly compromised the investigation. The fact that it was a costume party obscured people's appearances. Further, the high levels of intoxication pervasive at such a late-night gathering severely contaminated the potential witness pool even further. Even those who saw a confrontation might have been unreliable or provided conflicting descriptions, meaning police couldn't find clear, actionable testimony to advance this initial theory. The second, equally compelling theory focused on the element of random chance. Given the distance James's body was moved, investigators posited that he could have been the victim of a random crime of opportunity picked up by a driver passing on Transit Road. This scenario better explains the logistics of the body's removal, but struggles to fully account for the personal violence of the blunt force trauma. The investigation ultimately stalled because the authorities couldn't find any definitive evidence to back either theory. For decades, the Adamski file remained open but dormant, a permanent entry on the list of Erie County's most haunting unsolved mysteries. However, in 2017, the Lancaster Police Department, collaborating with the Erie County District Attorney's Office, decided to make a major push to bring the case back into the public eye. Law enforcement personnel hoped that nearly 35 years might have loosened old loyalties or prompted a witness whose conscience was troubled to finally come forward. A cornerstone of this renewed effort was the establishment of a significant financial incentive. Authorities offered a combined $11,000 reward from the police department and Crime Stoppers Buffalo for information leading to the arrest and indictment of the person responsible. Unfortunately, the financial lure didn't produce a breakthrough. By 2019, investigators confirmed they'd received only 2 new tips since the reward announcement. Further yet, they announced that these tips hadn't resulted in any meaningful progress in the investigation. Reading between the lines, this appears to simply just have been people coming forward to say they were at the bar on the night in question, who were willing to give new statements. The decades that have passed since 1982 have exacted a tremendous human cost. James Adamski's mother and father both lived out their lives without ever receiving the justice or closure they so desperately sought. They died without knowing who took their son's life, amplifying the profound tragedy inflicted by this unsolved crime. What really frustrates me about the Adamski case is how the circumstances of that Halloween night practically sabotaged any chance of a clean narrative. Investigators walked into a situation that was flawed at the foundation. You've got a packed bar full of people in masks, heavy drinking, shifting crowds, dim lighting, loud music, and zero reliable surveillance. From a legal perspective, that's a nightmare. Every potential witness is compromised before they even open their mouth, since I guarantee virtually no one was totally sober. You can't build a solid timeline when half the people you interview can't remember who they talked to, who they argued with, who they saw leave. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just dropping a big shout out to all my viewers, subscribers, YouTube members, and patrons. Seriously love and appreciate you all and your ongoing viewership and support. Tammy Pitkin was a 54-year-old real estate agent from Red Bluff, California, who vanished under mysterious circumstances in October 2022. On October 14th of that year, Tammy set off on a short road trip with her two dogs, telling her family she would be back in just a few days. She had recently separated from her husband, but was reportedly looking forward to positive life events on the horizon, including the upcoming birth of her first grandchild. In the days immediately after leaving home, Tammy's movements were partly traced through receipts and sightings. On October 15th, 2022, she was seen making a purchase at a convenience store in Glendale, Oregon. By October 16th, records show she had made a reservation at a Best Western hotel in Sutherland, Oregon. The last known indication of Tammy's whereabouts was in the Sutherland area on October 17th, after which there were no further signs of her. Finally, on October 26th, Tammy was officially reported missing to the authorities. 3 days after the missing person report, a crucial break in the case emerged, but it only raised more questions. On October 29th, a hunter in Lynn County, Oregon, discovered Tammy's gray Toyota Camry, abandoned on a remote logging road off Highway 20 near the town of Sweet Home. The car bore California plates and appeared to have been sitting in that spot for many days. In fact, it was found in an area that had received snowfall about a week earlier, and investigators noted the snow around the vehicle had no recent tire tracks or disturbances. This suggested the car had been there, untouched, since at least a week prior. This timing was crucial, as it roughly aligns with the last day Tammy was known to be traveling. Based on the fuel level in the tank and the condition of the dirt and snow, the authorities believe the car was likely parked on that dead-end road on the 17th and left there ever since. When police examined the abandoned Camry, they found many of Tammy's personal belongings inside. Her purse, identification, passport, and medication were all in the car, as were leashes for her dogs. Other items left behind included an overnight bag with toiletries, a weapon she carried for personal protection, and 2 boxes filled with clothes and shoes. Notably, these important items had been left behind as if Tammy had expected to return to the vehicle. Conspicuously missing, however, were Tammy herself and her dogs. There were no obvious signs of a struggle or foul play at the scene. The car was simply found locked and quietly sitting at the end of the isolated road. Search and rescue teams, including canine units, scoured the dense forested area around where the car was found, but turned up no trace of Tammy or her missing dogs. In a strange twist, one of Tammy's 2 dogs reappeared months later. A small white dog named Trooper was spotted running along Highway 20 in the vicinity of the car's location over 3 months after the disappearance. Trooper was rescued in early 2023 by a local couple, and though emaciated from surviving in the wild, the dog was alive and well. This discovery gave a glimmer of hope, but also deepened the mystery. If Trooper survived in the woods for months, what might have happened to Tammy and her other dog? Despite extensive ground searches in the area and ongoing efforts, no physical evidence of Tammy or the other pet has ever been found. Investigators confirmed that Tammy had no known connections to Lynn County that might explain her presence there. The official response to Tammy Pitkin's disappearance involved multiple law enforcement agencies across state lines. Initially, the Lynn County Sheriff's Office in Oregon led the search around the site of the abandoned car. However, at some point, the primary investigative responsibility went to the authorities in Tehama County in California, where she was from. From early on, law enforcement didn't find evidence pointing to a crime. In fact, investigators in Lynn County have indicated they don't suspect foul play in Tammy's disappearance. In the absence of clear signs of abduction or violence, one prevailing theory among officials has been that Tammy left the car on her own and perhaps became lost or injured in the wilderness. Tammy's half-sister, Erica Laughlin Bento, has been a prominent voice in the case and has offered additional insight into Tammy's state of mind before she went missing. According to her, Tammy had been under significant stress and was not mentally well leading up to the trip. The family believes she might have been effectively running away from her life for a brief time to clear her head, or possibly fleeing in panic. In interviews, Erica speculated that Tammy may have felt afraid or paranoid during her journey. For example, she might have thought she was being followed by someone, which could have caused her to drive onto an out-of-the-way forest road to evade whoever she feared. This line of thinking suggests that Tammy's own mindset could have played a major role. She possibly left the vehicle by choice, either to hide or to get away from a perceived threat, and then something went wrong. While authorities have been cautious in their statements, online communities and amateur sleuths have proposed a range of theories to explain Tammy Pitkin's baffling vanishing. The most popular theory echoes the one just discussed, that Tammy may have intended to disappear for a while due to personal pressures, but something went wrong. Supporters of this theory point to several pieces of information that suggest a planned getaway. For example, on October 15th, Tammy may have withdrew approximately $1,000 in cash from a bank account and also purchased a prepaid phone card. These actions haven't been confirmed in official accounts, but if true, they're speculated to be evidence that she intended to live off the grid. This theory is bolstered by confirmed evidence such as her taking 2 boxes full of clothing with her. Another widely discussed possibility is that Tammy became the victim of an accident after leaving her vehicle. For instance, one scenario often mentioned is that she might have let her dogs out of the car for a bathroom break in the wilderness, and that something went awry at that moment. If one dog ran off into the trees, Tammy could have chased after it and gotten lost, injured, like falling down steep terrain, or otherwise incapacitated where no one could find her. This theory is partly supported by the later recovery of Trooper alive in the area. It's conceivable that in trying to retrieve a runaway pet, Tammy ventured too far from the road and couldn't make it back. The forests of Lynn County are remote and rugged, with steep slopes and thick vegetation, so an individual without proper gear or who is disoriented could quickly get into trouble. Sadly, if Tammy was injured or lost in that environment, it's possible she succumbed to exposure or other dangers, and her remains simply haven't been found yet. Despite the leanings of law enforcement toward no foul play, some observers cannot shake the feeling that something more sinister might have happened. Some online commenters have focused on Tammy's personal life and the timing of her disappearance, raising questions about whether someone close to her could have been involved. Notably, Tammy's trip came about a month after she filed for divorce from her husband of many years. All that said, it's very important to stress that no evidence whatsoever implicates anyone close to Tammy in any wrongdoing. Others speculate that Tammy could have fallen victim to a stranger. Under this theory, Tammy might have crossed paths with the wrong person at some point between October 15th and 17th. Perhaps she picked up a hitchhiker or met someone at a gas station or motel who gained her trust. This theory remains entirely speculative, however, and the authorities explicitly don't believe this is the case. Others have speculated that she went to the woods to exit the stage on her own terms. This is supported by circumstantial evidence to indicate that she wasn't doing well mentally at the time of her disappearance. That said, many have questioned why she would have brought her dogs with her if this was the plan all along. Also, even though she wasn't doing well, she appears to have been excited to meet her first grandchild, again putting doubt on this theory. Nozomi Momoi was born in Tokyo in 1978 and rose to fame in Japan's plot-optional film industry during the early 2000s. She became a prolific entertainer in this scene, appearing in over 100 film releases within about a year. By 2002, however, Nozomi was growing tired of the relentless filming schedule and considering a shift to a more traditional acting career. Friends later revealed that she planned to get married, leave the saucy screen circuit, and pursue work as a stage actress. At 24 years old, Nozomi Momoi seemed poised to start a new chapter in life, but that was all about to go disturbingly wrong. On October 12, 2002, while visiting friends in Nagano Prefecture, Nozomi's life met a tragic end. Shortly before 9 p.m. that night, a passerby in the city of Shiojiri spotted a car on fire by a remote riverbank along the Narai River and called emergency services. Firefighters arrived and doused the flames, only to uncover a horrifying scene. 2 bodies were found, one inside the scorched vehicle and one on the ground a short distance away. Despite severe burns on both, authorities soon identified the victims. The woman was Nozomi Momoi, and the man was her companion on the trip, a 24-year-old acquaintance named Hiroki Sakai, who worked at a local car dealership. Evidence indicated that Nozomi had been slain before the fire. An autopsy found she suffered from 6 stab wounds. Her body had then been doused in a flammable liquid and set ablaze, seemingly to destroy evidence of the crime. Hiroki's remains were discovered in the car's back seat, burned so badly that examiners couldn't immediately determine his exact cause of death. Investigators did notice a knife, believed to have been used in the commission of the crime, lying near Hiroki's left hand inside the car, even though he was right-handed. This odd detail hinted that the scene may have been staged. From the start, the scene's strange circumstances puzzled investigators. It was baffling that Nozomi's body lay outside the car while Hiroki's was inside. Initially, police ruled that this was a mutual pact between the couple, ensuring that they would depart the world together. This was how things looked at first glance. Nozomi had been stabbed, and Hiroki appeared to have died in the burning car. As evidence emerged, however, this theory started to crumble quickly. Crucially, the autopsy showed that neither victim had inhaled much smoke, meaning Nozomi and Hiroki were likely dead or unconscious before the fire started. Such findings pointed to the disturbing likelihood of a third-party perp who had slain the couple and then set the car on fire to hide the crime. Investigators quickly tried to piece together what the two had been up to that night. It appeared Nozomi and Hiroki had left his home shortly before the incident, and they departed in a rush. At the residence, officers found the couple's shoes still by the door and a computer left running with the monitor on, as if the two intended to return shortly. These signs suggested they did not plan to disappear or die that evening. Instead, something urgent or unexpected drew them out. Despite all the inconsistencies, the authorities decided to close the investigation, a fact that would prove highly controversial. Hiroki's parents, unconvinced that their son was the perpetrator, urged authorities to continue investigating the case as if they had been slain by an as yet unknown perpetrator. In November 2002, about a month after the deaths, his family filed a formal complaint asserting that a third-party slaying had occurred. By January 2003, prosecutors reclassified the case as an open investigation into the slayings of both individuals rather than a closed case. Despite this significant step, the case stalled out with no apparent leads. With no suspects identified, Hiroki's parents also pursued a civil route to seek some form of justice. They sued Hiroki's life insurance company, which had refused to pay out benefits because of the authorities' original ruling on the case. This lawsuit led to a dramatic turn, and in early 2007, the Nagano District Court issued a landmark ruling. It found that based on the evidence, Nozomi and Hiroki's deaths were likely caused by a third party, and ordered the insurer to pay the benefits. While this didn't directly impact the criminal investigation, the 2007 ruling validated the family's doubts and put added pressure on law enforcement to find the perpetrator. Several inconsistencies in the case supported the theory that an outside assailant was responsible. Nozomi and Hiroki left in the middle of normal activities. They were found shoeless at the scene, and their shoes were later located back at the home they'd left. This may be a controversial take on my part, but in general, people don't voluntarily leave their homes without shoes on. Additionally, that computer in the house was still running, with the monitor on, suggesting they expected to return. Personally, I don't find this quite as compelling, as I often leave my computer on when I plan to go out even for a few hours. Also, if they had intended to end themselves in some sort of pact that night, I highly doubt they were too concerned about their computer or their power bill. Still, the cops and journalists found this to be a very odd fact, so perhaps there's some cultural context I'm not understanding here. Another major factor was the position of the bodies. Nozomi's body was found outside the car, while Hiroki's was inside the vehicle, in the back seat. If Hiroki had been the attacker, I find it odd that he would leave Nozomi outside and then climb back into his car to die in the fire. If it really was a pact, where this couple was to perish together, why wouldn't they just stay in the vehicle together? This hints that the victims were likely placed by another party. The weapon being found near Hiroki's left hand also hints at the possibility of the scene being staged. That said, though, it's possible that he held the item in his offhand after the commission of the crime, and it fell from there during the fire. Alternatively, this odd position may have been the result of him flailing during the fire itself. Further, the fire appears to have been used as a cover-up, which, if the initial hypothesis was correct, there'd be nothing to cover up regardless. Crucially, an accelerant was used to torch the car, yet no gasoline container was recovered at the scene, which to me implies the culprit took it. Coupled with the autopsy finding of almost no smoke in the victim's lungs, this suggests the fire was set after the slayings to cover up the crime. Investigators later discovered that a few months before the incident, Hiroki had lent about 800,000 yen to someone, but the person named on the IOU did not actually exist. At the time, this was about $6,500, a significant sum that this individual may not have been willing or able to pay back. This odd find hints that Hiroki was conned, and it raises the possibility that the meeting on the night of the crime was a setup related to that fake loan. It's possible that the couple were lured out that night and slain as a way to wipe this debt clean, but surprisingly, that's not the darkest theory of this case. One theory that continues to circulate in discussions surrounding Nozomi Momoi is that she may have been targeted specifically because she was seeking a new line of work. Nozomi was actively planning a significant career shift, transitioning from the provocative limelight of late-night cinema into a more mainstream and socially accepted acting sphere. Notably, however, she was still at the height of her career and was generating significant income for those producing her brand of direct-to-video entertainment. This change might have posed a threat or disappointment to certain powerful industry figures who had financial stakes in her career. It's been speculated that by stepping away, Nozomi may have inadvertently disrupted ongoing agreements, or perhaps angered someone who felt betrayed or financially slighted. In an industry known for Yakuza involvement, this clearly isn't out of the realm of possibility. Supporters of this theory point to the strange and staged nature of the crime scene, suggesting it was intended as a stark warning to others who might contemplate similar exits. Others indicate that the scene, with no forensic evidence left behind, suggests that Nozomi and her friend had been taken as part of a professional job. This, of course, would suggest the involvement of organized crime. Hiroki may have been an unwitting patsy, lured to the scene, and positioned to take the fall for Nozomi's carefully staged slaying.